The National Director of Public Prosecutions, Adv Shaun Abrahams, has been roundly condemned for persisting with charging the Minister of Finance, Pravin Gordhan, on fraud. The spurious charges of fraud against Pravin Gordhan and his two co-accused, former SARS officials Oupa Magashula and Piet, were yesterday dropped upon Abrahams' decision to review the evidence and charges that were brought forward. This comes after various business institutions, civil society organizations and political heavyweights put their support behind the minister, calling the charges unfounded and without evidence. And marches were planned for tomorrow, and some of them will be continuing anyway. The Helen Suzman Foundation, as well as the Freedom Under Law, both approached the courts shortly after the charges were laid to demand that the charges be withdrawn, and they have been successful in their bid to halt the public institutions being used for political motives and gains. Legal researcher at the Helen Suzman Foundation is Piet, Olivier, and the executive officer at Freedom Under Law is Nicole, Fritz. They are here with me to talk about the developments of yesterday. Nicole and Mr. Olivier, pleasure to have you with us here. Much appreciated, right?
Thanks very much.
Now, let's go back to Shaun Abrahams yesterday. Did you expect him to withdraw the charges ultimately?
It's very difficult to predict what Mr. Abrahams is going to do. We were hoping that he would withdraw the charges, and obviously the case was overwhelming for him to do so. And ultimately, we were very happy that he did eventually withdraw them. Obviously, his complete lack of contrition is something that we're very disappointed by. This has damaged the country and its institutions enormously, and we would have expected at least an apology from Mr. Abrahams.
And from your side, Nicole?
Look, I think the stakes were very high. I can't imagine that they had to know that if we'd gone to court in our bid to have the decision to prosecute set aside, that we had, enormous prospects of success, that there would have been sort of humiliation for them. I think that they sought to avoid that, and I think the only sense that we've seen on the part of the National Prosecuting Authority thus far is a withdrawal of the charges rather than...
But why was the matter dragged on up to the brink of the court appearances? This is just a day or two before the actual court appearances. And both your organizations have been making the case against these charges for quite a while now. Some of us are so informed about the case as if we are lawyers representing one or the other side and we are ordinary folk, but we understood it all along.
Right. I think we can only speculate as to that. At best, it's incompetence. We've said that there was no way these charges could have gone ahead, have been put to the Minister and Mr. Piet and Mr. Magashula, given that there was no legal grounds, no factual grounds for these charges. No responsible Director of Public Prosecutions could have authorized such a prosecution with the evidence before him. We know that at the 11th hour he sought to garner further information that he should have looked at before issuing the charges. So there's incompetence, I think, at best, and this is what we see at this kind of 11th hour withdrawal. Or worst case scenario, this is just kind of malign influence, and I think a kind of desperate bid for them to find a way to go ahead with these charges and a final sort of recognition that there was no way that they would be able to do so successfully.
Well, there was a time when pressure mounted from yourselves, when you launched papers and affidavits explaining why he had to reconsider the case and so on, but still he pressed ahead. So, there are some people who suspect that it could be more the Symington's hostage drama of this past week at SARS that led to the review of this decision. What do you think?
It could, that could definitely be what added to the pressure on Mr. Abrahams. I think he was facing our legal charges and embarrassment in the court, but also what he was facing was just broad public outrage. And I think the Symington hostage drama added more to the feeling amongst ordinary South Africans and civil society that something absolutely outrageous is happening here and it needed to be stopped.
Now, the chief whip of the ANC, even in Parliament, also came out 2 Sundays ago saying that he's going to be with the Minister of Finance in court, giving him support, the elders of the ANC and many prominent people, different political parties, including the ANC itself, were going to march against these charges on the side of Pravin Gordhan. Now, why would Shaun Abrahams miss all that? He's an advocate, right? He's one of the top lawyers in the country, responsible for a very big job of prosecuting without fear or favor. Where do you think he might have missed the point here?
Look, I mean, one has to say that the political outcry is not necessarily something that we want a responsible public prosecutor to be responsive to. I mean, it may be that you have to take a decision that is unpopular
Yes.
in the public domain, but nonetheless is required in order to uphold, the rule of law.
Sorry, Nicole, I understand. Sorry for the interruption. But then, if that is the case, people like making comparisons. I think it's the DA in particular that says, when it comes to the corruption charges against the president, the NPA is appealing to the courts not to go ahead and prosecute, notwithstanding the ruling by the North Gauteng court that says the charges must be pursued, right? But the same NPA says it does not want to. But in the case of Pravin Gordhan, it pressed ahead. What do you make of that inconsistency?
Well, it does seem obviously that there are certain political forces, and by no means all political forces, but very powerful political forces in whose interest these charges are, and it does have to lead confirm speculation, I would say, that Mr. Abrahams is acting in the interests of a certain cabal within government.
Let's go back to how he handled the matter. What did you make of his whole announcement about it and saying that certain information was not brought to his attention, it only was brought to his attention now, but you yourselves had this information all along? How could that happen?
Yeah, look, Mr. Abrahams' behavior at the various press conferences are just indicative of a leader passing the buck. He is the head of the NPA. Ultimate responsibility rests with him, no matter how much he tries to duck that responsibility. The argument that he didn't have access to the Flock-Symington memorandum is not terribly convincing at all. The memorandum on which they explicitly based the charges initially says basically the same thing as the Symington memorandum, that the early retirement and subsequent re-employment was perfectly legal. The Symington memorandum doesn't add much, to be perfectly honest. And in addition, even if the Symington memorandum was crucial, this is something they clearly should have looked at when they decided to charge. Our organizations got access to these memoranda. We're not detectives, we're not prosecuting authorities, we're not policemen. And if we can get access to it, it's definitely the case that the Hawks and the NPA should also have had access to it.
Now, there have been calls for Shaun Abrahams to step down, or at least express contrition, and both those things are not forthcoming from him. If anything, he says, what has happened now has enhanced the integrity of the NPA. Has it enhanced that integrity?
He said at his initial press conference, where he announced that these charges would be issued. He said the days of not taking the NPA are over. And what followed that? I mean, just weeks and weeks in which the National Prosecuting Authority has been held, been regarded with contempt, with a lack of respect. So I'm not sure that we can take what Mr. Abrahams takes seriously. He's one to make these types of rhetorical pronouncements, but I don't think that we can credit them with any seriousness. I mean, I think this is a man who has acted dishonorably. The fact that he has in his public press conferences, certainly the press conference yesterday, sought to throw his subordinates under the bus, basically suggests that they're responsible and that he himself takes no accountability as the head of this institution, I think puts into perspective that this is a man, even if you are not familiar with the legal provisions, this is a man who is unfamiliar with the concept of honor, of integrity, and actually unfamiliar with the basic tenets of justice, and so is unfit for the office of Director of Public Prosecutions.
So if I understand you, then you're suggesting that the honorable thing that he should do from now on is to consider stepping down.
I certainly think that is, if he has any modicum of self-respect, of integrity, that he would step down from this position, which he has brought into utter disrepute.
Now, there's also the matter that when he announced he was going to go ahead with the court case against Minister Pravin Gordhan, that the day before he had met with the president and other cabinet ministers at Luthuli House. What did you make of that, and the fact that he did not disclose at his press conference?
Yeah, it's deeply suspicious and deeply unwise for him to do so. the NPA is supposed to be an independent institution, and to meet with senior officials within the ANC, particularly these officials in the ANC, the day before an announcement is made in a prosecution that appears to be political, is irresponsible, unwise, and definitely consistent with the idea that the prosecution was for a malign purpose.
Now, there's the view that, Shaun Abrahams has done what he has done. It may have caused the country embarrassment and may have had a negative impact on the economy. But now, since he's done that, let's just pick ourselves up and move on and forget about this episode. What's your view? I mean, what else should happen? Shaun Abrahams says he's not going to apologize. He's not embarrassed by this. No heads, or at least his, is not going to roll. And let's leave it at that. Is there anything that can be done beyond this or should be done?
I think, well, apart from Shaun Abrahams apologizing and him possibly resigning, or possibly the President and Parliament taking steps to suspend and remove him, I think South Africans and civil society should continue to be vigilant. We saw that Mr. Abrahams did not close the door on further investigations on the so-called SARS rogue unit or further charges in relation to that. So we as South Africans need to be careful and guard against further abuses of power, especially given that the initial charges related to the rogue unit and the questions that were sent by the Hawk to the minister were completely baseless, both in law and on any version of the facts. So I think constant vigilance is something that's definitely called for.
I would just add, I mean, if this type of abuse can be perpetrated against very senior public officials, one can only imagine the type of abuse that can be perpetrated against ordinary South African citizens who don't have access to this type of power when they are having to confront institutions like the National Prosecuting Authority. And I think every South African deserves a criminal justice system in which they can trust. And the National Prosecuting Authority is an essential institution within our criminal justice system. And I think we need to be able to demand that there is wholesale cleanup of the criminal justice system, so that whether it's the head of the Hawks, whether it's the head of the National Prosecuting Authority, with the head of the police, that we are able to say that these individuals are unassailable in their integrity and their honesty. And that is not something that we as South Africans are actually able to trust in at this present time.
Well, your organizations have been very active in making sure that this matter ends where it is now, but there's still more to be done. Many questions that arise from what transpired, the abuse of power that you talk about, the Symington situation, and many others. But thanks again for coming around and talking to us. And Nicole, Piet, thank you for having been our guest.
Thanks
We
so
appreciate
much,
it.
Tim. Thank you.
Well, the drama continues. There are many other cases, by the way, that relate to this one. Don't think it's over yet. You're still going to hear more about other court cases that relate to state power and the possibility of abuse of such power. Don't forget, write to us. The email address is tonight@modise.tv. On Twitter, share your views @TimModise.